Hi, I'm Dr. Gordon Hassick. Welcome to Choices. Whether we realize it or not, choices are all around us. Every day we're confronted by situations where we have to make a choice, sometimes between two alternatives, most of the time between many alternatives. Choices can be overwhelming. As we saw in the last program, learning to make choices can be a life-transforming experience. Some of the people we interviewed talked about how the ability to make choices is the first step towards freedom in our lives. If we give up that right to choose, we lose our sense of self. We miss out on opportunities, and we lose the joy that comes from living fully. So how do we go about making choices? What's the best way to confront the thousands of decisions that we're confronted with every day? That's the topic of this program. And as you'll see, there's no one right answer, but there are some guidelines. By making choices, we start to direct our lives instead of leaving it up to someone else to do for us. So with that in mind.
All right, everybody, this is it. Tape. Places, everybody, here we go. Give it about 12. Okay. Camera. Action!
I like that story of little girl was running out and mom was getting the roast ready to cook at the family reunion, and she cut off both ends of the roast and put it in the pan, and the little girl says, "Mommy, why did you do that?" "Oh," she said, "because Grandma did it. Go ask Grandma why." So she went into Grandma and says, "Grandma, how come you cut off the ends of the roast before you cook them?" "Oh, because Great-Grandma did. Why don't you go ask her?" And so the little girl goes ask Great-Grandma, "Great-Grandma, why did you cut off the end of the roast before you cooked it?" She said, "To make it fit in the pan." And you see, if we don't question things that happen to us in our life, if we don't look at them to perhaps see them different, then we just do it because that's the way so-and-so did it, or because of this, or because of that. And then we just pass it on down through generation to generation. Right. And then it takes one inquisitive mind to go back and ask why. And then you can see something different.
You know, you just kind of go on automatic. You don't think about it. But sometimes that automatic, you know, has unhappy results, and you have to step apart, examine it, say, you have to move in on it. It's what I call becoming a transition figure. I was talking about that today, you know. Transition figure in a family to stop the transmission of dispositions or tendencies from going from one generation to the other, to stop it with you from going into your kids. And I'm convinced that people can do that, but they have to have a very strong sense of vision and mission. I don't think they necessarily have to erase all of the social and psychic scarring of their childhood either. I know that's the big thrust now in the recovery movement, but I think we have a lot more freedom to choose our response to all of that than we know. I just think we take the course of least resistance and feel victimized and absolve ourselves of responsibility of choice.
I think that choice is something that is uniquely human, but it doesn't separate us from other animals and things. We're still very instinctively driven as our animals. And if we don't exercise choice, then what would happen is the instinctive parts of our being and how we've been created will take over. So we'll still survive. We'll still get by. We'll still have some success in our life based on whatever instincts we developed, whatever habits we developed. But when you assert choice over the instincts and you think things through more deliberately, then you can rise above just instincts, which I think allows people to have exceptional lives instead of mere existence or survival. So it's unique to us, but it doesn't mean that we actually have the capacity, or actually I would say we have the capacity for choice. We don't necessarily have the ability to exercise it. That has to be developed.
For the first few years of life, until around the time of self-awareness, which is 7, 8, 9 years old, there is no separation of stimulus and response. And that's when the parents really need to take advantage so that they can teach their value system. If they don't, the street will. They're going to get it one way or another. Or the TV will. I mean, 6, 8 hours a day, it's like 40 hours a week. So parents need to proactively really take advantage of those early years. And the most important thing, in my opinion, the parents can do is to treat each other with respect and kindness. Because when they sense that, when they sense the love toward them as unconditional, and the way that you treat their mother or their father, you're modeling them. When they're very young, tender, impressionable, stimulus gets into the response. When self-awareness comes, there's a separation there. That's where the freedom to choose is developed. But if you've laid deep inside there a value structure that is uplifting and contributive and based on integrity and fidelity and fairness and kindness and contribution and so forth, it'll stay.
It starts when we're young. The awareness of the world around us grows into the attentiveness to the world inside us. As adults, we call this interior world by many names: consciousness, mindfulness, discernment, awareness. But whatever its name, it's one of the most useful things we have to begin making choices.
They would have to start off with becoming aware of their own habits and respecting the part of our lives that are run by our instincts and our habits. When I say respecting, I say that very deliberately because there seems to be a philosophy out there, if you will, today where life would be better if we all lived by choice, moment to moment. I personally don't think that that's doable. It's overwhelming, it's too much stimulation, it's too much to think about. It actually works really well for us to develop habits, to develop routines, to go by our instincts in many ways. It's when those aren't serving us, when our life is not working well, when the harmony has gone out of our life, that we need to stop and say, wait a minute, maybe my habits are not serving me. Maybe the things that I'm following and I'm sort of drawn to don't work. And then at that point, you have to start to ask yourself some questions. First of all, if you're not aware of those habits, if you're not aware of those instincts, and if you're fighting them and as if they're bad, you're going to be so caught up in that turmoil that, again, you can't choose because you're fighting. There's no open-mindedness. And choice requires some open-mindedness. It requires that you are willing to look at all sides of a situation and all sides or whatever sides you can think of at the time. And then with that awareness of the instincts and with that awareness of the habits, you can then start to seek options. And oftentimes options are not things that you actually have in your thinking at the time. You have to go out and seek those options. You have to ask other people, read books, listen to tapes, look at other people's lives who have been successful, and start to bring in other points of view and perspectives and say, well, I could do it this way, I could do it this way.
What I found was a process of breaking away from our old patterns, our old ways of seeing the world was necessary. Some kind of a break in that. For some people, it was questioning. That may have been provoked in, through a number of experiences, but simply questioning, asking questions, not taking everything at face value, not believing everything that is in the media. Another process of breaking from old patterns was traveling. Some of the people I interviewed were, people who had gone to other countries and had said, well, if people can eat in different ways, if they can sleep in different ways, if they can do all kinds of things in different ways, maybe everything I've grown up with isn't the only way. And so that was another opening to seeing things in a new way. An obvious one, of course, is crisis. And for several people, either a cultural crisis or personal crisis was the opening to questioning. Another was being exposed educationally to some new ideas that helped to open their mind to seeing things in a new way. A third theme was transcending old patterns in some way, and for many that was a spiritual experience of seeing the light, having a near-death experience, but some kind of an experience that really stretched their boundaries and really gave them an inner knowing that there was something beyond the world that they had constructed or had consented to seeing like the rest of the culture. Fourthly, what everybody said was that there needed to be a conscious choice in pursuing a path of a different worldview, that they had to make a conscious decision to be on this path. A fifth theme was that people felt that they needed validation for changing to a new worldview. That either validation through finding a framework to help them make sense of it, by reading or meeting with people, a validation from kindred spirits. Some people talked about their own validation coming from within, because by subscribing to that worldview and beginning to live that way, they would get feedback that would give them the internal knowing that they were on the right path.
Making choices. It should be so simple, but it isn't. There's no handy reference guide, there's no book, no conference, no one person with that magic formula for making choices. These things can assist us, but ultimately we have the final say. As you'll see, the best guide for choosing isn't only out there, it's in here. But using that inner guide means taking risks, confronting your fears, and ultimately it means taking responsibility for the choices you make.
I think when I look back on my life, I went through some really significant, painful periods. At those times, I tended to feel sorry for myself. I tended to feel isolated. The universe was not coming to help me. And then somewhere along the line, I had to ask myself, do I enjoy this pain, or do I take responsibility for it and change it? And now I remind myself, when I start feeling sorry for myself, it may last an hour or so rather than a few days, that I have to change it, that I have the will within me to make those changes, and that I'm responsible for those changes, and that in every negativity there is some positivity, and I have to learn to look at my emotions and see whether I'm anxious. And if I'm anxious, then I have to address that anxiety, because it's not me to be anxious. I have to be peaceful and work towards that. And to recognize that a lot of the problems we face are really in our head rather than out there. And that the anxiety and everything is created by those numerous scenarios we build up in our head. And that's where our pain lies rather than at the outside a lot of the times.
It was something that my grandfather taught me as a very little. He says, you listen. Allow the possibility of everything, but then you do think. Because he said the only tool you have, it is your mind. We don't have any other choices. This is where the choices begin, inside of your mind. Grandfather taught me other thing, and he said, you are the only thinker in your mind. So that means I have a control. If everything was a thought at first, everything. This is one theory. I believe in it. So everything was a thought at first. That's great to know. But then if I know I am the only one that thinks in my mind, I have the choice. This is where the choice comes from ability to think. So I can think this way, or I can think that way.
If a person is driven by past decisions, by sensitivities that when they're inflamed that they get the better of them, if all these issues that they have in their life, if you will, call them issues, if they're so strong and have such an emotional attachment to the person that even in spite of the fact that they have made some choices and they've thought about what they want and they've established a mission, they find themselves constantly hesitating, stopping, or undermining themselves, then the tools that they need is tools of self-awareness. They need tools to resolve issues so that they can move on instead of getting caught up for long periods of time in problems or resolving conflicts. They need to learn how to deal with those sorts of things, and that's a very powerful tool. And it frees them to make their choices, but it not only frees them to make the choice, more importantly, it frees them to act upon the choice.
I am going to make a choice. and I'm going to follow it because I thought about it. It's not because somebody else said, this is what you should do, this is what you should wear, this is how you should be, this is how you should look. I have ability to think and to make my own choice.
Awareness helps us try to anticipate the consequences of choices, even though we can never really do it, but at least we don't do it in a fit of rage or anger or petulance. We do it quietly.
And I think a fairly small percentage of people really have the awareness of themselves being apart from their feelings and moods to where they can begin to really exercise this power of choice.
I mean, this is a beginning. It's a foundation. The choice is the foundation. Then comes the other thing. It's called effort. And to produce the effort, to have the effort, we must have the will. In order to have the will, we must remember ourselves.
Real choices are only possible when we think. As Bozhenka says, that's the foundation. But what do you build on that foundation? Thoughts are one thing, but how do you translate that into action? There's many ways of doing that. Let's consider Karen Jensen's idea.
We can really choose to have anything in our lives. It starts as a thought, and then it comes into feeling and desire. And it's the desire that carries it forward. And desire means commitment and action. You know, you can have the thought, but if that's as far as it goes, it really kind of dissipates. So you have the thought with it, you make the choice through the thoughts, and then you bring it into the desire, which I think is fed through the heart, through the soul, and that's what carries the energy into manifestation. And a lot of people are putting the thoughts out in a really negative way with a lot of emotion behind it, and they wonder why all these things are happening in their lives. Whereas the other side of that can be you put a real positive emotion and desire behind something, that will also manifest. So it's a matter of, what do you choose? Do you choose to be cause, or do you choose to be effect in your life? And that's really what it boils down to, is choice of cause and effect. You can let someone yell at you and get mad and upset because they're having a bad day, or you can choose to say, that's their thing. You know, I don't choose to be the effect of that. And that's the same in our health, in every area of our life. What are we choosing, and do we choose to be cause or effect?
I just had a perfect example of this when I was doing my California speaking tour. And you probably find this hard to believe, but I had authority issues at one time. And so here I had done this seminar last year, and I had a resounding success, and this is where we all go down to display ourselves in our organization, because I'm a minister, and this is our organization's presentation. And I went down there, and they had given me a smaller room than I had the year before. I had 145 people. They set me up for 40. I had a reaction. And then I asked the lady who was running it, and she said, well, so what happens if I have more than 40 people? She said, tell them to go somewhere else. I had a reaction. So then I said, well, hold it now. What would old Doug do out here?
To develop your ability to utilize the choice, the capacity to choose, you have to be aware, first of all, that there's the potential for choice. You have to be aware of the habits that are driving you, because otherwise you'll act unconsciously before you ever have the time to deliberate and make a choice.
Old Doug would go find all his colleagues and friends to prove how he had been jilted, and what's the matter with the people who were running it. Didn't they have any sense to know something good when they seen it? And I could have been right. But I said, no, I'm going to do it. My other mentor and teacher said, Dr. Arlene Bump, she told me, Doug, you just dress up, show up, and enjoy your experience. So I decided to do that. And as it turned out, I was able to get 100 chairs in that room, open up a sliding door, had 66 people sitting outside, and had a tremendous success with that. And the lady that was in charge of running the workshops and seminars found out about it from other people and come and congratulated me. So that's the message I wanted to convey, but there it was done in the affirmative, and guess what I got to be right about? I got to be right about pleasure. Everybody was happy.
You have to become more aware of possibilities. You have to expand your perception of things. You have to be constantly taking in new information and new ways of looking in order to be able to choose.
I had a great time rather than being grumbling and moaning and groaning and complaining about how I had been stiffed. A real simple little thing. But most people react, and then they act upon the reaction. And then the choice they've made is to take them into perpetuation of pain, and gee, ain't it awful, and they've done it to me again, so I set myself up for being a victim if I go that way. I victimize myself by being a victim of circumstances and conditions. But I remember what Viktor Frankl said. He always said that no matter what, you always have the ultimate choice, because you can choose in how you respond to what is going on around you, and nobody can take that away. And in that, we find freedom.
What do you know about your habits and what's driving you now? Since you've already know where you want to go, and you're convinced that it would be a great life, and then you don't take the actions that you've thought of, what do you think's in the way? And so the tool that they would be developing is a tool of self-awareness that says, this is what drives me now, and this is what makes me tick, and these are the things that I'm sensitive to, and when they flare up, they get the better of me, and then they get a handle on themselves in the way of self-perception.
Perception, self-awareness, looking within. These are phrases that keep coming up again and again. Understanding who we are and how we view the world is an important step in making choices. Any choice is a healthy one as long as it springs from your real desires, from your faith versus your fear, from your deepest principles and values, from your passion. Understand that in yourself, and you'll soon recognize the choices others are making as well.
There's a little example I made up about a man that was moving from Vancouver to Winnipeg, and he drove all night, and he come through Calgary about noon, and he got out of his truck across from Princess Island and went out to the park with a brown bag and a little bit rough of a beard, and had his lunch and laid down to sleep. And along come a derelict and looked at the bag and says, must be good wine. And along come a police officer and looked at the bag and said, looks like a derelict, maybe I should run him in. And along come an office worker and says, oh, must have been a hard day at the office. And along come a yogi and said, oh, what a wonderful day for meditation. So you see, all the people that come along made a choice about what was going on. And they all come from their perspective, and for them, every one of them was right. But in reality, they were all wrong, but that didn't matter, because that's what their experience was, because of the choice they made.
If I may advise anything, anybody, it would be, please do think. Don't believe me. I don't want you to believe me, because that is wrong. I want you to think about what I said, and you think for yourself, because you have the tool. And then you make a choice. Well, am I going to learn something from this woman, or am I not? See, that's your choice. But it can be done before you think. Because if people don't think, they could say, hey, she did it, I'm going to do it same way. But you can't. It's just, it comes from you. It comes from within you. And once we know that, things do start rolling. They are happening.
I have both an Eastern and Western background. And the Eastern philosophy is that we have to assume responsibility for whatever happens to us in life. As a child, I may not have understood that as well as now, but I certainly believe that as I have grown older and made changes in my life, that most of the times the things that have really taken me out of whatever dilemma I have been in is trying to stop blaming anybody or everybody else and take responsibility for it and change it. And I find when that takes place, I really do well.
As you can see, the idea of self-awareness, the ability to think for yourself, being open to possibility and taking responsibility all factor highly in the process we call making choices. But these are not strengths that show up right away. They're not skills that instantaneously appear. You build them slowly, patiently, and you work on them your entire life. It's challenging and it takes effort. You still have your setbacks and you'll still get caught up. But the benefit is a life filled with possibility and with choice that is acted upon. Once you realize that choices can be made, it can transform your life. It's the first step on the road towards freedom. It puts us back in the driver's seat. On our next program, we'll take a closer look at overcoming the obstacles that keep us from making choices. Please join us. I'm Dr. Gordon Hassick.